Former Missouri Governor Matt Blunt is the president of the American Automotive Policy Council, the lobbying group created by the big three U.S. automakers. And he joins me in studio. Governor, welcome to Bottom Line. Thanks for your time today.
It's great to be with you.
Sir, let's start with currency manipulation. Is it still the biggest impediment to free trade, in your opinion?
Absolutely. It's clearly the largest impediment to free trade. And even an economy like Japan, where you have very complicated non-tariff barriers, clearly the devaluation of their currency is the greatest impediment to free trade and has real impact on our industry. As we export more cars and parts from the United States than anything else, about $140 billion worth of product on an annual basis. We're on track to double exports in 5 years. That is very difficult to do with these strong headwinds because of the unfair trading practices of Japan.
Okay, given the information you just gave us, then why haven't discussions on currency provisions been front and center in other proposed trade deals?
I think they clearly should. It's important that the United States not just get an Asian trade deal, but a high standards agreement with a number of Asian economies that have a history of manipulating their currency to gain an unfair trade advantage.
Well, sir, to your knowledge, were these type of currency manipulation provisions even discussed at APEC last week?
You know, I don't believe they were. So it's not been shared with me if they were. But we think it's time for the administration to respond to the bipartisan, bicameral sense of the Congress, where more than half of the members of the House and the Senate have come together and said the administration should work to include currency disciplines in the Trans-Pacific Partnership and other free trade agreements.
How does the manipulation of the currencies impact the big three automakers, not just in North America, but beyond the borders?
Yeah. Well, it clearly has a big impact in the United States. It's a unearned export subsidy for Japanese automakers who ship nearly 2 million vehicles a year from Japan to the United States. They use current weak yen to really subsidize their overcapacity in their own industry because they've not gone through the sort of restructuring that we have. But it also affects us in these third markets where we're competing head-to-head with Japanese OEMs around the world. As I said, we export more cars and parts than anything else, but we can't do that if we don't have something close to a level playing field.
Governor, another issue American automakers are pushing access to markets in places like Japan and China. The U.S. recently won an anti-dumping complaint against China. How much progress has there been made in addressing issues such as tariffs?
Well, you know, I think it's really important that future trade agreements seek to go beyond tariffs. Certainly, a tariff elimination has to be a part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Tariff elimination has to be a part of the TTIP. But when you're dealing with economies like Japan that have a history of closing their market systematically for decades and have 94% control by Japanese companies, it's really important that we have a rational approach to removing our tariffs. But beyond that, addressing these non-tariff barriers that are a highly sophisticated way for Japan and other economies to close their markets to other car companies.
Speaking of the Japanese economy, it's the third largest in the world, and we just heard yesterday that it has slipped back into recession. If this weakness does impede growth in Japan, is it possible that would be a game changer for the American auto industry?
Well, the American auto industry, I believe, is vibrant around the globe, except in a handful of economies like Japan that keep their market closed to export. But clearly in the United States and important export markets like the Middle East and South America and Africa, the big three are really enjoying phenomenal success with a high-quality product. But in order to get that product to consumers, they need to have a fair trading field.
Sir, some of the growth that we're seeing around the world is not global because of the uneven nature of the global recovery. A lot of it's regional. Does the fact that it might be local impact U.S. sales at all?
Well, you know, I think actually currency manipulation exacerbates the fact that we don't have a more even global recovery from the economic crisis. So clearly currency manipulation, I think, plays into that. We need to allow the market to set currency exchange rates, not government intervention.
Sir, we have about a minute left. I have to make an awkward pivot, and it involves your former home state of Missouri. As you know, a lot's been going on in Ferguson since the shooting death of Michael Brown back in August. There were riots. There's been some violence. There's been of tension between the police and the African American community long before this took place. What needs to be done now? How can there be peace in Ferguson, Missouri? What needs to bring both sides together?
Well, I think most observers would say that the state government and local government were slow to respond to really an emerging crisis when it first developed. I think it's important just to work with community leaders, law enforcement professionals to ensure that you have a solid way for folks to demonstrate their opinion, but also preserve public order. And so I wouldn't want to intrude on the current governor's turf and comment on that, but I think it's important that everybody be prepared for what may happen in the coming weeks.
Former Missouri Governor Matt Blunt, president of the American Automotive Policy Council, joining me in studio. Sir, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you.